Clara Whitmore pressed her back against the cold wood of the train car wall and tore the letter in half. Her hands weren't shaking from the cold. They were shaking because the man who wrote it, her own uncle, had just signed a document declaring her legally dead. She had 20 minutes before the train reached Broken Creek, Montana. 20 minutes to become someone no one would ever look for. She tucked the torn paper inside her boot, picked up her bag, and walked toward the door. She was about to marry a man she had never met. If this story already has your heart, please subscribe to our channel, hit that notification bell, and drop the name of your city in the comments. I want to see just how far this story travels. Now let's begin. The train platform at Broken Creek smelled like coal smoke and cattle, and Clara Whitmore stepped off the last car at exactly noon with two things she intended to keep secret. The first was her name. Not the name she'd given the agency. Clara Whitmore was real enough, the name her father had called her since the day she was born. But the last time she'd heard that name spoken aloud in Philadelphia, it was by a lawyer standing over her father's coffin, and the tone of his voice had told her everything she needed to know about what was coming next. The second thing she intended to keep secret was heavier. Considerably heavier. It took 4 men and one very irritated station porter to wrestle her wooden trunk off the cargo car and onto the platform, and when it hit the boards with a sound like a body dropping, every head within 50 feet turned to look. Clara did not look back at them. She kept her eyes forward, adjusted the strap of her small travel bag over her shoulder, and told herself the same thing she'd been telling herself for 4 days on this train. You are a practical woman. You are looking for work and a home. You are nobody's daughter and nobody's heir and nobody's problem. The lie had gotten easier somewhere around Ohio. It hadn't gotten comfortable yet. Miss Whitmore. The voice came from her left, and Clara turned. The man standing at the edge of the platform was not what she expected. She wasn't sure what she had expected exactly. She'd read his letter 3 times on the train, memorizing the spare, careful sentences, the way she used to memorize financial documents, looking for what wasn't said as much as what was. I am a widower. I have a daughter, age 6. My ranch needs a capable woman. I am not looking for romance. I am looking for someone willing to work. She had found the honesty refreshing. Most men lied better than that. But reading those words had painted a certain picture in her mind, tired, beaten down, older than his years. A man ground to dust by grief and hard seasons. Ethan Callahan was none of those things. He was tall, broad through the chest and shoulders, with the kind of build that came from actual work rather than the posturing she was used to back east. His hat was dusty, and the brim was uneven on one side, where it had been bent too many times. His coat was worn at the elbows. His boots had seen 1,000 miles at minimum. His eyes, when they found hers, were dark brown and completely unreadable. "Yes," Clara said. "That's me." He looked at her for a moment. Just one moment, the kind where a man is taking stock and not bothering to hide it. She had been looked at that way her entire life, usually by men who were calculating her father's net worth through the quality of her dress. She braced herself for the familiar slide of disappointment. "Long trip?" he asked instead. She blinked. 4 days. "You eat anything?" "I on the train, yes." He nodded once, as though that settled something, then looked past her at the trunk. "That yours?" "Yes." He studied it a moment with the expression of a man who has just been told his horse has 3 broken legs and is trying to decide how best to proceed. "What's in it?" "Books," Clara said. "Mostly." It wasn't entirely a lie. There were 3 books in the trunk. They just weren't the most important items. Ethan looked at her again, and she thought she saw something flicker behind those unreadable eyes. Not suspicion exactly, but attention. The kind of careful noticing that a man develops when he's spent years reading weather and animals and landscapes, turning it now on a person. "All right," he said. "I'll get the wagon." That was it. No questions. No commentary on the trunk or her traveling dress or the fact that she'd come 4 days by train to marry a stranger in a territory most women in Chicago had never heard of. He turned and walked toward the far end of the platform, and Clara exhaled a breath she hadn't known she was holding. The wagon ride to the ranch took nearly 2 hours. Ethan didn't talk much, which Clara appreciated. She used the time to watch the land instead, the way Montana opened up around her, vast and indifferent, and nothing like the cramped, elegant streets of Philadelphia. The sky here was a different kind of sky. It didn't feel like a ceiling. It felt like something you could fall into. Lily was waiting at the fence when they arrived. Clara saw the little girl before she saw anything else about the ranch, small and serious-faced, with dark hair like her father's, and eyes that were doing the exact same careful measuring that Ethan's had done on the platform. She was holding something in her hands, a cloth doll with a missing button eye, and she was squeezing it so hard the stuffing was probably suffering. Ethan set the brake on the wagon and climbed down. "Lily, this is Miss Whitmore. She's going to be staying with us." The little girl looked at Clara. Clara looked back. "Your doll's lost a button," Clara said. Lily blinked. "I know. I can fix that if you'd like." "Papa says you're going to be our new mama." The word landed between them with the weight of a stone thrown into still water, and Clara watched the ripples move across Ethan's face, a quick tightening around the jaw, something behind the eyes that looked like it might be pain carefully locked away. "I'm going to be your papa's wife," Clara said carefully. "That's a little different from a mama. It takes time to know what kind of thing it becomes." Lily considered this with the gravity of someone 3 times her age. "Are you going to leave?" "Lily." Ethan's voice was quiet but firm. "Papa says everybody leaves eventually." Clara looked at Ethan. He was looking somewhere past the fence line, jaw tight, and he did not look back at her. "I'm not planning on it," Clara said. It wasn't the promise the little girl wanted. Clara could see that. But she had learned enough about promises in the last 3 months to know that the only ones worth making were the ones you could actually keep. She wasn't going to swear permanence to a 6-year-old when she didn't yet know whether the men coming for her would leave her any choice in the matter. The inside of the house was exactly what his letter had prepared her for. Clean enough, but barely. The kind of clean that a man achieves when he is working from sunup to sundown, and does not have hours to spare for the finer points of domestic order. There was a layer of dust on the window ledges that told her the windows hadn't been properly washed in a season. The curtains were sun-bleached and thin. The kitchen showed signs of earnest but limited cooking, a man who knew how to feed himself and his daughter, but had not yet mastered the art of making a meal feel like something. She did not say any of this. She set her travel bag down beside the door and asked where she would be sleeping. Ethan cleared his throat. "There's a room off the kitchen. I thought until things are settled." He stopped. "That sounds fine," Clara said. The relief on his face was brief and genuine, and she pretended not to see it. He was uncomfortable. She understood. She was uncomfortable too. They were strangers who had agreed to share a life because necessity had cornered them both, and the polite fiction that this was a normal arrangement only held if nobody looked at it too directly. They were married the next morning by a justice of the peace in town. It took 9 minutes. Ethan said the words looking straight ahead like a man walking into cold water and not slowing down to think about it. Clara said hers looking at her hands because she'd already spent 3 months thinking about it, and thinking more wasn't going to help. There was no celebration. There were no flowers. There was a cup of coffee at the diner on the main street, and then the wagon ride home, and by afternoon, Clara Whitmore, Clara Callahan, now she supposed, though the name sat strangely, was feeding chickens for the first time in her life, and trying to remember how far a woman could fall from Philadelphia society before she hit solid ground. It turned out the ground was right here. It smelled like pine and livestock, and the particular cold, clean smell of Montana moving toward autumn, and her boots were already a disaster, and one of the chickens had taken a strong personal dislike to her and was making it known. And Clara stood in that yard with her ridiculous travel dress getting dusty and a rooster insulting her from 6 feet away, and she started laughing. She hadn't laughed in 3 months. She didn't stop for a long time. From the doorway of the barn, Ethan watched her. He didn't move. He just stood there with a pair of work gloves folded in his hands and watched this woman he'd married yesterday morning, standing in his yard, laughing at a rooster, and something in his chest did a thing he was completely unprepared for. He turned back to the barn before she could notice him watching. The first week was hard. Clara was not a woman who had spent significant time in kitchens. She'd grown up in a house with a cook, a housekeeper, and 2 maids, and while she wasn't foolish enough to say so, the evidence made itself plain in the first morning's breakfast when she managed to burn the biscuits on the outside while leaving them raw in the center, a feat Ethan regarded with something approaching scientific curiosity. "Don't say anything," Clara said. "I wasn't going to." "You were thinking it, miss." He stopped. "Clara, I'm not thinking anything except that maybe we should start with eggs." "I know how to make eggs." She did not, it turned out, know how to make eggs. Not in a cast-iron skillet over a wood fire anyway. The process was different from anything she'd encountered, and the result was technically food, and both of them ate it without complaint while Lily watched the proceedings with enormous interested eyes. "Mama used to make them fluffy," Lily said. The silence that followed that sentence was the specific silence of a wound being opened. Clara set down her fork. "Would you like to teach me how she did it?" Lily blinked. "I don't know how she did it. I just know they were fluffy." "Then we'll figure it out together." Clara looked at Ethan. "If that's all right?" Ethan looked at his daughter, then back at his plate. "That's fine," he said, and his voice was careful in the way of a man choosing each word for its weight. The eggs improved by the 3rd day. By the end of the first week, the biscuits were edible. Not good, but edible, and Ethan ate every one of them without a word of complaint, which Clara slowly came to understand was not indifference, but a particular form of encouragement, the kind that didn't require words because words would have made it fragile. She began to understand things about him in pieces. He worked from before dawn until after dark without being asked, without complaint, without any particular expectation that someone would notice or thank him. He checked on Lily in the night she heard him once through the thin wall between her room and the hallway. Just the soft sound of his boots, and then a door opening briefly, and then silence, and she understood that this was something he did every night, a ritual of reassurance that he performed for reasons that had nothing to do with practicality and everything to do with terror of loss. He wasn't a man who talked about what he felt. He was a man who showed it in where he put his feet and how he spent his hours. Clara had grown up surrounded by men who talked about their feelings eloquently and acted on none of them. This was different enough to be disorienting. She was still trying to get her bearings when the first real moment with Lily happened. It was a Tuesday evening 3 weeks in, and Clara had been reading to her after supper. Lily had picked out the book herself, something with fairy tales, and she'd been listening with the polite skepticism of a child who had learned to expect disappointment from good things. Then Clara reached a page where the princess in the story was locked away by her family, and Lily sat up straighter. "Why did they lock her up?" Lily demanded. "Because they were afraid of her," Clara said. "But that's not fair." "No, it isn't." "Did she get out?" "She did." "How?" Clara turned the page. She stopped waiting for someone to unlock the door and figured out how to pick the lock herself. Lily was quiet for a moment, processing this. Did anyone help her? Clara thought about that for longer than the question probably required. "Someone taught her," she said finally. "A long time before. She hadn't realized she was learning, but she was." Lily looked at her with those dark measuring eyes. "Did someone lock you up?" Clara kept her voice steady. "In a way." "Did you pick the lock?" "I'm working on it." The little girl seemed to accept this. She leaned back against Clara's arm, this small, warm weight that Clara had not been expecting, and said, "I'm glad you came here." Clara looked down at the top of her head, dark hair, and the particular smell of a child's soap and something sweeter, and she said, "Me too, Lily." It was not a lie. This surprised her. What also surprised her was how quickly she'd started to mean the things she said out loud in this house. She told Ethan one evening 2 weeks in that she thought the northern fence line needed repair. She'd walked out that way in the afternoon, looking at the property, and there were 2 sections that were leaning badly enough to let a determined animal through. He looked at her across the supper table. "You walked the north fence. I wanted to see the property. That's a mile and a half out. I'm aware of that." Something moved in his expression. "You're right about the fence. I've got it on my list." "Your list is long." "Yes." "I could help?" The silence lasted 3 seconds. "You know anything about fence repair?" "No," Clara admitted. "But I'm reasonably good at following instructions, and I have 2 hands, and—" She stopped herself before finishing the sentence before saying, "And I am tired of sitting in this kitchen feeling useless, because that was too much truth for a supper table 3 weeks into a marriage that was still finding its shape." "I'd like to be useful," she said instead. Ethan studied her. She had grown used to being studied by him, that same careful attention he'd turned on her at the platform, the same quality of seeing. It didn't feel invasive. It felt more like being read accurately, which was different from being judged. "All right," he said. "Tomorrow morning." She worked the fence with him the next day, and the day after that, and the day after that. He was patient with her ignorance in a way that didn't condescend. When she did something wrong, he explained what was wrong and why once without repetition. When she did something right, he didn't make a production of it. He just moved on to the next thing, which she came to understand was the highest form of acknowledgement this man offered. And Lily watched all of it with those enormous eyes. The little girl had begun bringing her problems to Clara. Small ones at first, the doll's button eye, a tangle in her hair that she couldn't manage alone. A question about arithmetic that her father struggled to explain. Then larger ones, a falling out with another girl in town that had left Lily red-eyed and quiet for 2 days, a fear about a recurring nightmare she hadn't told her father about because she didn't want him to worry. "He already worries," Clara told her. "Parents worry. That's what they do." "He has enough to worry about," Lily said. It was such an adult thing to say in that small, serious voice that Clara had to look away to collect herself. "Lily, you are never too much to worry about. You understand me." The little girl's chin wobbled once. "You are never too much," Clara said again. "Not for him. Not ever." She told Ethan that evening quietly, while he was checking the locks on the barn. She told him about the nightmare, and the way Lily had described it, something coming in the dark, something taking things away, and she watched his face go very still, in the particular way it went still, when something hit him below the armor. "I'll talk to her," he said. "I know. I just thought you should know before she came to you with it." He was quiet for a moment. "Thank you. You don't have to thank me." "I know." He said it simply without deflection, and that was somehow more than thank you. What Clara did not tell him was that the nightmare Lily described sounded uncomfortably like the nightmares Clara herself had been having for 3 months. Something coming in the dark. Something taking things away. She had started watching the road. Not obviously. She had trained herself over those last months in Philadelphia not to do anything obviously. But she knew the way a wagon looked at 2 miles distance. And she knew the kind of horses that men from the East preferred. And she knew that the stage to Broken Creek came through on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and she had started keeping track of who got off. Nobody came who didn't belong there. Not yet. The trunk was under her bed, locked with a key she kept on a chain around her neck close to her skin. She had checked the lock every night since she arrived. It was the last thing she did before she slept. Her fingers finding the cold metal of the padlock in the dark, confirming its weight and its solidness. The documents inside were the only thing standing between her and a man who had already killed once to get what he wanted. She hadn't told Ethan that part. She hadn't told him about her Uncle Harland Whitmore, who had sat across from her at her father's funeral with red eyes and a face full of grief that Clara had believed for exactly 4 days before she found the papers. Or about her cousin Raymond, who was better looking than Harland and considerably better at pretending to care, and who had come to her bedroom door 2 nights after the funeral to tell her very gently that it might be best if she let the men in the family handle the business affairs going forward. She had smiled at him very pleasantly and said she'd think about it. Then she'd gone downstairs to the study and spent 3 hours with her father's files. What she found there had taken the floor out from under her. Falsified signatures, fraudulent transfer documents, a backdated will that left everything: the railroad investments, the land holdings, the cash reserves, the stock portfolio. All of it to Harland Whitmore, to be managed in trust for Clara. Until she married, and after she married to be absorbed into her husband's estate and administered by a co-trustee to be named by Harland himself. A perfect cage. All it required was Clara's cooperation, which they would have had if she hadn't found the letter. It was in the back of her father's private ledger, folded twice and tucked behind the false bottom of the side drawer. A letter from her father's personal solicitor, written in the month before the accident, outlining his suspicions about Harland's involvement in a competing land deal. A deal that would have been enormously profitable. A deal that her father had blocked. 3 weeks later, her father's carriage had lost a wheel on a mountain road outside Pittsburgh. The solicitor's letter had come back to her father unopened, forwarded from an office that no longer existed. Clara had sat with that letter in her lap for a very long time. Then she had done 4 things. She had gone to her father's bank and withdrawn everything she could access in cash. She had located in the base of the old study desk the original will her father had written 3 years ago. Properly witnessed, properly notarized, naming her as his sole heir and executor. She had gathered every fraudulent document she could find and packed them with her father's will and the solicitor's letter and her own written account of the events into the wooden trunk. And she had written to a mail-order bride agency in Chicago. She had not chosen randomly. She had spent a week studying listings. She needed a man who was far from the East Coast, far from anyone who might recognize her or report back to Harland. A man who was struggling enough to genuinely need the arrangement and therefore wouldn't ask too many questions. A man with a child, because a man with a child had something to protect, and a man with something to protect was more likely to be principled about it. Ethan Callahan's listing had been almost insultingly brief. Widower, daughter 6, working ranch in Montana Territory, looking for a capable woman, not a romantic situation, hard work and honest dealings. She had written back the same day. Lying in her narrow bed, now 6 weeks into this life, she had built from necessity and calculation. Clara stared at the ceiling and tried to count the ways she had been wrong about what she would find here. She had expected functional. She had not expected warmth. She had expected tolerable. She had not expected Lily. She had expected a transaction, 2 adults making the best of a difficult arrangement, maintaining a careful civil distance. She had not expected to be handed work gloves at 6 in the morning and shown with patient hands how to set a fence post correctly. She had not expected to have her opinion solicited about the condition of the property, the management of the household, the question of whether the sorrel mare was lame in the left front or the right. She had not expected to be treated from the 2nd week onward like someone whose thoughts were relevant. She had been surrounded by relevant thoughts her entire life, and somehow no one had ever asked for hers. And she had not expected to lie awake at night trying to figure out how to protect this specific man and this specific little girl from the thing that was coming for her. Because it was coming. She knew it the way she knew weather, the particular feeling in the air before a storm. Harland Whitmore had resources that Clara had never fully understood until the moment she was running from them. He had lawyers in 6 states and a private investigator who had found 3 women who'd tried to disappear from difficult family situations and had found them all within 8 months. 8 months. Clara had been here 6 weeks. She pressed her hand flat over the floor beneath the bed, over the cold boards where the trunk sat, locked in the dark, and she thought about the weight of those papers, the careful signatures, the dates and figures and notary stamps that, taken together, told the full story of what Harland Whitmore had tried to do, and how her father had tried to stop him and what it had cost. She thought about a 6-year-old girl who had already lost one woman she loved. She thought about a man who worked before dawn without complaint and checked on his daughter in the night and ate burned biscuits without a word because he understood somehow that a woman needed to find her footing before she could stand. She made herself a promise in the dark. She was going to figure out how to protect them. even if it meant doing the one thing she had been dreading since the day she stepped off that train. She was going to have to tell Ethan the truth. Not yet. Not until she knew it was safe. Until she had figured out the shape of the danger and how close it was and what resources she had to work with. Not until she had something more to offer him than a problem. But soon. Soon she would have to open the trunk and hand him her real life. And trust that a man who ate burned biscuits in silence and mended fences without being asked would know what to do with the evidence of a crime that powerful men were willing to kill to keep buried. She listened to the wind off the mountains, vast and indifferent as the sky, and thought about trust. She had trusted her father. She had trusted the structures of law and family and financial institutions her whole life. She had been wrong about all of it. She did not know if she could be wrong about Ethan Callahan. She was not certain she could afford to find out. She was even less certain lying in the dark with her hand flat over the locked trunk that she had any choice. Outside the ranch was silent. The horses in the barn shifted and settled. The nighthawks called somewhere out over the dark pasture. Montana lay enormous and breathing around the small lit house, and Clara Whitmore, who had been one of the wealthiest women in Pennsylvania 6 weeks ago, who was now technically Clara Callahan, and couldn't name the proper cost of a dozen eggs, felt something very strange move through her chest. Not safety, she couldn't afford safety, but something that wasn't fear either, something that felt improbably and against all evidence and reason a little like the beginning of belonging. She closed her eyes. She kept her hand on the floor above the trunk. She did not sleep for a long time. And 3 states to the east in a Philadelphia office with mahogany paneling and gas lamps and a view of a city that had never once questioned his right to own it. Harland Whitmore set a photograph on his desk and smoothed a cable message flat with his palm. He read it twice. Then he poured himself a drink and looked at the photograph. Clara, 17 years old, caught by surprise at a garden party, laughing at something just out of frame. "Found you?" he said to the photograph. He picked up his pen. He wrote a name on a clean piece of paper. The name was not Clara's. It was the name of a man who was very good at traveling quickly and asking no questions and bringing things back from a long way away. He folded the paper in half. He rang for his secretary, and somewhere on a ranch in Montana, Clara Whitmore's hand tightened over the boards above her locked trunk, and she stared at the ceiling, and the wind moved through the dark. The morning after Harland Whitmore wrote that name on a piece of paper, Clara woke before the sun and made a decision. She was going to stop being afraid of the kitchen. It was a small decision, and a practical one, and it had nothing to do with the fact that she had spent most of the night listening to the wind and thinking about a man in Philadelphia with a pen in his hand. Or it had everything to do with it. Either way, she was in the kitchen at 5 in the morning with a lamp lit and flour on the table, and she was going to make biscuits that did not require an apology. She was on her 3rd batch when she heard Ethan's boots on the stairs. He stopped in the kitchen doorway. She did not look up. "I know they're not right yet. Don't say anything." "I wasn't going to." "You were going to have that expression." "What expression?" "The one that's very carefully not an expression." A pause. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Yes, you do." She heard him cross to the stove and pour himself coffee. She heard the particular sound of a man leaning back against something and getting comfortable, and she kept her eyes on the dough. "My mother made biscuits every morning," Ethan said after a moment. Clara looked up. He was looking at his coffee cup. She said the trick was cold hands. Warm hands make the dough tough. How cold? She used to hold her hands under the pump water before she started. Clara looked at her hands. Then she walked to the pump, ran water over them until they ached, and came back to the dough. She did not say thank you. He did not wait for it. That was how it worked between them. She was beginning to understand. The exchange happened, and then it was done, and neither of them made it into more than it was. It was a small kindness, and it was offered and received, and that was the whole of it. The 3rd batch of biscuits came out right. Not her mother's recipe, not Ethan's mother's recipe, not anything Clara had tasted before. Just biscuits, golden and even, and when she put them on the table, Lily came downstairs still half asleep with her hair in every direction, and picked one up and ate it standing there without a plate, and said with her eyes still mostly closed, "These are good." Clara sat down at the table and felt something unnamed settle in her chest. Ethan caught her eye over his coffee and said nothing, which was exactly right. The weeks that followed had a rhythm to them that Clara had not anticipated and could not quite account for. She had expected the ranch to feel like surviving. She had spent the last 3 months surviving, and it had a particular texture, taut and thin, and exhausting in the way of a wire pulled past its tolerances. This was different. Hard, yes. Her hands were developing calluses that would have horrified her in Philadelphia. Her feet had learned the particular language of uneven ground, and her back had adjusted to the reality of actual physical work. And her understanding of how food connected to effort, connected to animals, connected to land, was changing in ways she hadn't predicted. But it was a solid kind of hard. It had weight and shape, and at the end of it there was usually supper on the table, and a tired man and a little girl, and lamplight, and none of those things felt like endurance. They felt absurdly and persistently like something she was choosing. She found herself choosing them more explicitly by the day. It was Lily who showed her where the difficulty actually lived. The little girl had nightmares that were not metaphors. Clara had gone to her twice in the night, the second time finding her sitting up in bed with her arms wrapped around herself and her eyes open and fixed on the window with an expression that was too old for a 6-year-old face. "Lily." Clara sat on the edge of the bed. "What is it?" "She's not coming back," Lily said. Clara did not pretend not to understand. "No, sweetheart, she's not. Papa said she's with God." "Yes, but I don't know where that is." Lily looked at her with absolute seriousness. "I've been looking at the sky for 3 years, and I can't figure out which part." Clara sat with that for a moment. The particular grief of a child trying to locate her dead mother in astronomical terms was not something she had a ready answer for, and she was suspicious of ready answers anyway. "I think it might be the feeling," Clara said finally, "not the place." Lily frowned. "What feeling?" "The one you get when you remember something she did. Something specific. Do you have something like that?" The little girl was quiet for long enough that Clara thought she'd said the wrong thing. Then, "She used to hum when she cooked. Not a real song, just humming." "What did it sound like?" Lily hummed a few bars, low and formless and sweet. "That's where she is," Clara said. Lily looked at her. "That's not nothing," Clara said. "That's a whole person inside a sound. That's a lot of places to carry someone." Lily was quiet for another moment. Then she lay down and pulled the blanket up and said very quietly, "Will you stay until I'm asleep?" Clara stayed. She told Ethan about it in the morning briefly while he was saddling the gray gelding. She didn't elaborate or editorialize. She just told him what Lily had said and what she had answered, and then she stopped. Ethan stood with one hand on the horse's flank for a long moment without moving. "Thank you," he said. His voice was careful in the way of a man trying to keep something from spilling. "You don't have to. I know." He turned and looked at her directly. It was still a little disorienting how directly he looked at things. "I know I don't have to. I want to." He went out with the horses, and Clara stood in the barn with the smell of hay and leather and the sound of the gelding's feet on the packed dirt floor. And she thought about the way he had said it. "I want to." Not "that's fine" or "no trouble," or any of the 1,000 deflections available to a man who didn't want to be seen caring about something. She was still thinking about it that afternoon when she walked to the north fence to check the repair they'd done the week before, which was when she saw the rider. He was far enough out that she couldn't make out his face, just the shape of a man on a horse moving along the road that came in from the east, moving slowly, the way someone moves when they are looking for something rather than going somewhere. Clara stood still. The rider stopped. At that distance, she could not tell if he could see her. She was standing at the fence line against the shadow of a tree, and her dress was brown, and she had learned in the last 3 months to be aware of what she looked like against the background behind her. She stayed very still. The rider sat for a moment, then moved on down the road. Clara waited until he was gone from sight. Then she walked back to the house quickly, but not running because running attracted attention, and she was done attracting attention. She went to her room. She checked the lock on the trunk. She sat on the edge of the bed and told herself it was nothing. A traveler on a road. Montana had roads and travelers, and not every man on a horse was her uncle's investigator. She told herself this in a very reasonable voice, and then she sat very still and listened to her own heartbeat and tried to decide if she believed it. She did not entirely believe it. She believed it enough to go back to the kitchen and start supper. She watched the road. 2 days later, Ethan came home from town with a set expression and a particular kind of silence around him that she had learned to read. "What happened?" she asked. He sat down at the kitchen table and put his hat on the wood and looked at it. Someone came into the general store asking about new arrivals, whether any women had come through recently from the east. Clara's hands stilled over the dough she was working. "Tom Fletcher told him nobody recent," Ethan said. "Tom's not a man who offers information for free." What did the man look like? Ethan described him. Short, broad, a coat too heavy for the weather, a horse that was better quality than you'd expect for a traveling man's animal. Clara turned back to the dough. "Clara." She didn't stop moving her hands. "I heard you." "That's not—" He stopped. Started again. "I need to know if this is something I should be aware of. It might be nothing. It might be." His voice was quiet and even. "Is it—" She pressed the heels of her hands into the dough and felt the resistance of it, the way it pushed back. "Not entirely," she said. The silence behind her stretched long enough that she thought he might ask the question she wasn't ready to answer. Then she heard his chair push back and his boots on the floor, and she braced. "All right," he said. That was all. All right. She turned around. He was standing by the door, hat in hand, and his expression was the one she had come to recognize as the version of his face he wore when he had decided something, and the deciding was done, and the acting was what came next. "What does that mean?" she asked. "It means whatever this is, you're not navigating it alone." He settled his hat on his head. "I'm going to talk to a man named Henry Briggs. He's the county sheriff, and he's honest, which ain't common, and he knows how to be discreet about what he knows. I'm not going to tell him anything you haven't told me. But I want him aware something might be coming. You don't know what's coming." "No." He looked at her steadily. "But I know how to prepare for weather I can't see yet. And I know the difference between a woman who's nervous for no reason and a woman who has reasons she's keeping careful." Clara opened her mouth, closed it. "I'm not asking," he said. "Not tonight, but Clara." He said her name the way he said it now, which was differently than he had said it in those first days, not a label, not a designation, but something he had put weight behind. "When you're ready, I'm here." He went out. Clara stood in the kitchen with flour on her hands and listened to the sound of his horse leaving the yard, and told herself she was not going to cry about a man who had just offered her the one thing she had been trying to survive without. She cried a little. Not much, just enough. Then she wiped her face with her flour-covered hands, which was its own kind of ridiculous, and went back to making supper. Lily found her like that. "Why is your face white?" Lily asked. "I was working with flour." Lily considered this. "You look like a ghost." "Thank you." "I don't mean in a bad way." Lily climbed onto her chair and rested her chin on her folded arms and watched Clara with those enormous eyes. "Miss Harper at the schoolhouse is a ghost. She's all gray and she never smiles. You're a different kind of ghost." "What kind?" "A new kind. The kind that's still deciding if it's staying." Clara looked at her. The little girl looked back. "I'm staying," Clara said. And this time she didn't add the qualification. She didn't say "I'm planning on it" or "I'm not going anywhere yet" or any of the careful hedges she'd been building her sentences with for 6 weeks. She said, "I'm staying in the way that you say something when you have, without quite noticing, it stopped treating it as a question." Lily reached across the table and patted Clara's hand, once briskly, the way a small adult might reassure a large, worried child. Then, she picked up her arithmetic book and opened it. "You said you'd help me with the sums," she said. "I did say that." "So help." Clara pulled the book toward her, and they bent over it together, and neither of them mentioned the flour on Clara's face, and outside the sun dropped toward the mountains, and the light went long and gold across the floor. And Clara worked through multiplication tables with a 6-year-old who attacked arithmetic like it owed her something, and she let herself have the feeling. Just for an hour. Just while the light was that color. She would worry again after supper. She was very good at worrying, and it wasn't going anywhere, and an hour away from it would not change what was coming. But an hour here with this child in this light, in this kitchen, that she was beginning to know by its sounds and its smells, and the particular way the boards creaked in the cold, felt like something worth defending. Ethan came home late that evening, and if he had news from Henry Briggs, he kept it to himself for the night, and Clara did not ask because she had decided that tonight she was going to stay inside the hour she'd given herself. She sat by the fire after Lily was in bed, and read while Ethan worked at the table on the account books, and the fire cracked and settled, and neither of them spoke for a long time. And it was not an uncomfortable silence. It was, Clara realized, the kind of silence that required trust to maintain. You couldn't sit in silence like this with a stranger. You could only do it with someone who had moved without announcement from a stranger into something that didn't have a name yet, but occupied a different category. She was thinking about that category, about how to name it, when Ethan said, without looking up from his accounts, "Tell me something about where you came from." Clara looked at him over her book. "Not the whole of it," he said. "Just something true." She thought for a long moment. "My father used to take me to his office on Saturday mornings," she said, "when I was young. He said I was the only person who understood what he was trying to build." She paused. "I think now he meant it as a kindness. I thought he meant it as a business arrangement." "What was he building?" "He called it infrastructure." A pause. "He meant a railroad. He meant steel and labor and right-of-way agreements and decades of political negotiation. But I think what he actually meant was—" She stopped. "What?" "Something that would last," she said. "Something that would still be there after he was gone." Ethan was quiet for a moment, his pen still in his hand. "My father built this ranch," he said. "Died when I was 22. I used to stand in the yard and think about all the things he'd put his hands on and whether that was the same thing as him still being here. Is it? I don't know." His pen moved again on the ledger page. "Some days it is." Clara looked at the fire. "My father is gone," she said. "He's been gone 4 months." She had not said it aloud to anyone since she left Philadelphia. She had carried it the way she carried the trunk, locked, necessary, private. Ethan stopped writing. "I'm sorry," he said. "I'm still angry at him," Clara said. "For leaving before I understood the full picture. For trusting people he shouldn't have trusted." She paused. "For trusting me to figure out the rest of it on my own." "Is that what you're doing?" "Trying to." He looked at her then, that direct, unguarded look that she was still not entirely used to. "You don't have to do it on your own." Clara opened her mouth. "I know," he said. "I know you're not ready to say what the full picture is. I'm not asking." His voice was quiet and steady as a fence post in good ground. "I'm just telling you what's true." She looked at him for a long moment. She thought about a lawyer's letter and a falsified will and a man in Philadelphia writing a name on a piece of paper. She thought about a girl humming her mother into the only afterlife that ever made sense. "I know," she said. She meant it differently than she had before. They stayed by the fire another hour without speaking, and it was the same silence as before, earned and real. And when Clara finally went to bed, she lay with her hand over the trunk and felt something she could not afford to feel, which was hope. Hope was dangerous. She knew this in the specific way you know things that have cost you. But it was there. She left it there. She was almost asleep when she heard it. Horses, more than one. Coming up the road from the east at a pace that nobody traveled at this hour unless they had a reason. Clara was out of bed, before her eyes were fully open, her feet on the cold floor, her hand around the key at her throat. She did not go to the window. She pressed herself against the wall beside it and listened. The horses slowed. She counted footfalls, 2 horses, she thought, stopping somewhere short of the yard, not coming in, stopping and sitting. Her heartbeat was very loud. Then Ethan's door opened, his boots on the hall floor, not rushing, but deliberate. She heard him cross to the front room, heard the sound that she had come to recognize without seeing the particular weight of a man picking up a rifle and checking it. Then silence. The horses outside, after a long moment, moved away, back down the road, east the way they'd come. Clara stood against the wall until she couldn't hear them anymore. Then she sat down on the edge of the bed very slowly and put her face in her hands. She sat like that for a moment. Then she stood up. She went to the door of her room and opened it, and Ethan was already there, not waiting exactly, but present, standing in the hall with the rifle loose in his hand and his eyes meeting hers in the dark. "They're gone," he said. "I heard. 2 riders. They didn't come into the yard." "Testing," Clara said. Her voice was steady. She was proud of it. "They were checking whether anyone would respond." Ethan looked at her. She could see the question sitting in his expression. Not demanding, not angry, just open, patient, waiting for what she was ready to give. She wasn't ready. She was standing here in the dark at 2 in the morning, with her heart trying to escape through her sternum, and she was not ready. "Tomorrow," she said. "Okay, I mean it. Tomorrow I'll tell you." "Okay, Clara." She looked at him, his face in the dark unreadable as always, and somehow readable. In spite of that, the man who ate burned biscuits and checked on his daughter in the night, and had just stood in his front room with a rifle at 2 in the morning, without once asking her what she had brought to his door. "Thank you," she said. He nodded once, the way he acknowledged things. He went back to his room. Clara went back to hers. She put her hand on the trunk and she made herself think clearly. Tomorrow she would tell him, because tonight had just proved the thing she had been trying not to know, that she could not handle what was coming alone, and that more importantly, Ethan Callahan was already handling it alongside her, whether she had told him to or not. A man who would do that deserved the truth. She owed him the truth. She owed herself a single person in this world who knew the whole of it. She lay back and stared at the ceiling and did not sleep. And outside, somewhere on the eastern road, 2 horses moved through the dark toward a relay station where a telegram would be sent at first light. In Philadelphia, Harland Whitmore would read it before noon. She had maybe 4 days, maybe less. Tomorrow she would tell Ethan everything, and then they would see what he was made of. Clara was at the kitchen table when Ethan came downstairs at 5 in the morning. She had been there since 3. The trunk was open beside her. She heard him stop in the doorway. She heard the precise moment he registered what he was looking at, the open trunk. The papers spread across the table, the lamp burning low, her face, which she knew was not the face of a woman who had slept. "Sit down," she said. He sat. He did not look at the papers yet. He looked at her. "I'm going to tell you everything," Clara said. "All of it. And I need you to let me finish before you say anything, because if I stop in the middle, I don't know if I'll be able to start again." "All right." She started at the beginning, not the beginning of the ranch or the mail order arrangement or the train ride from Chicago. The real beginning. Her father's study, the Saturday mornings, the ledgers and the maps, and the particular smell of ink and railroad smoke that she associated with the only person who had ever looked at her and seen someone capable of running an empire. She told him about her father's death, the carriage, the mountain road outside Pittsburgh, the wheel that the inquest had ruled accidental and that Clara had believed was accidental right up until the moment she found the solicitor's letter. She told him about Harland Whitmore. She told him about the false will, the fraudulent transfer documents, the backdated signatures that had been good enough to fool 3 lawyers, but not quite good enough to fool a woman who had spent her childhood reading financial instruments over her father's shoulder. She told him about Raymond, about the bedroom door, the gentle voice, the suggestion that she let the men of the family manage things going forward. She said it without expression because she had wrung the expression out of that memory a long time ago in a hotel room in Chicago at 2 in the morning. And what was left was just the fact of it, clean and cold. She told him about the 4 things she had done: the bank withdrawal, the original will, the documents packed into the trunk, the mail order agency. She told him why she had chosen his listing specifically. She watched his jaw tighten at that just briefly, just once, and then he smoothed it and she kept going. She laid out the original will on the table in front of him. She laid out 3 of the fraudulent documents beside it. She laid out the solicitor's letter, still bearing the crease from where it had been folded and hidden behind a false drawer bottom. Then she laid out the most important piece, a document she had not looked at since she packed it in Philadelphia because looking at it had a way of making her hands shake. "This," she said, "is a letter my father wrote to his own lawyer 10 days before he died. It describes a meeting with Harland, a specific threat Harland made about the right-of-way negotiations, and his belief that Harland was capable of taking extreme action to acquire the business." She pressed it flat on the table. "My father was afraid of his own brother," she said. "He wrote it down. He hid it. And 3 weeks later, his carriage went off a road he had driven 100 times. The kitchen was completely silent." Ethan looked at the letter for a long moment. He did not touch it. "How much?" he said. "How much?" "What?" "The fortune." "How much is it?" Clara looked at him. It was the practical question, the business question, and it was exactly the right question to ask, because it was the question that explained why men were riding down the Eastern Road at 2 in the morning. "The railroad holdings alone are worth approximately $2 million, she said. "The land, the investments, the cash reserves, conservatively $4 million total." Ethan was very still. "And your uncle knows the documents are here," he said. "He knows I took them. He doesn't know where I went, or he didn't until those writers last night." She met his eyes. "I think he knows now. Or he's close enough that the distinction doesn't matter." Ethan looked at the papers on the table. He looked at them the way he looked at fence lines and weather measuring, calculating, mapping what needed to be done. "You said the original will is properly witnessed and notarized," he said. "Yes. 2 witnesses, both alive, both in Pennsylvania. The notary is also living. The signatures are genuine and verifiable. And these," he gestured at the fraudulent documents, "these can be proven false. The dates don't match the paper stock. I had a document examiner look at copies in Chicago before I left. He gave me a written statement. It's in the trunk." She paused. "Additionally, my father's personal bank records show withdrawals inconsistent with the transfer amounts listed in Harland's documents. The numbers don't add up, and I have the original bank statements." Ethan looked at her. "You planned this," he said. "Not an accusation, a recognition." "I planned everything I could," Clara said. "What I didn't plan was how long it would take them to find me." He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Was last night their first time near the property?" "No." She told him about the rider on the road 6 days ago, the one she'd seen from the fence line. His expression didn't change, but something behind his eyes shifted, the particular shift of a man recalibrating how much time he had. "You should have told me that night," he said. "I know." "Clara?" "I know, Ethan." She looked at him directly. "I am telling you now. I told you I would tell you now, and I am telling you now. I did not handle the last 6 days perfectly, and I am sorry for that." He absorbed this. The jaw muscle worked once, then he let it go. "All right," he said. He stood up and went to the door and opened it and stood there looking out at the dark yard for a full minute without saying anything. Clara sat at the table and let him do it. He was a man who processed information by moving his body, and standing in a doorway was about as still as that process got. He came back to the table. "Here's what we're going to do," he said. She listened. He had clearly already been thinking about contingencies, which should not have surprised her. A man who ran a ranch alone knew how to plan for problems he couldn't see yet. He outlined it simply, and without drama. Henry Briggs would need to know the full situation. The documents needed to be copied, and the copies needed to be in a separate location from the originals. There was a lawyer in Helena named Aldous Crane who had handled property disputes for 2 ranches in the county and who had a reputation for genuine competence. Ethan wanted to send a telegram to Crane today. "He'll want to meet with you," Ethan said, "and he'll want to see the original documents." "I understand. Helena is 3 days by wagon. We'll need to time it so we're not on the road when—" He stopped. "When Harlan's people are moving," Clara finished. "Yes." She looked at him across the table in the lamplight with her father's documents spread between them. This man she had chosen from a catalog listing because he had something to protect. This man who had eaten burned biscuits and mended fence and told his daughter that she was never too much and stood in the dark at 2 in the morning with a rifle and not once asked her what she'd brought to his door. "Ethan," she said. He looked at her. "Why are you doing this?" He seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "What do you mean?" "I brought danger to your home. I brought powerful enemies and a legal battle and men riding past your property in the dark. I should have told you from the beginning, and I didn't." She kept her eyes on his. "You have a daughter. You have a ranch you're trying to hold together. You did not sign on for any of this." Ethan looked at her for a long moment. Something moved through his expression, something she didn't quite have the language for yet, something that lived in the territory between resolved and raw. "You've been here 8 weeks, he said. "Yes. In 8 weeks you learned my land better than some men who've worked it for years. You repaired the kitchen, organized the stores, sorted the account books, fixed 3 pieces of tack I hadn't gotten to in a year." He paused. "You sat with my daughter in the night when she was afraid. You told her where her mother was." Clara said nothing. "You chose to stay," Ethan said. "Every morning you could have walked to the road and flagged the stage and gone somewhere else. You chose to stay, and you chose to work, and you chose Lily." He held her gaze. "A woman who does that doesn't get abandoned to a situation she's in partly because she was trying to protect people she cared about." Clara's throat closed. She said nothing because there was nothing adequate to say. Ethan reached across the table and picked up the solicitor's letter carefully by the edge. He read it slowly and put it back down. "Your father sounds like he was a good man," he said. He was. Her voice was almost steady. He was also stubborn and occasionally wrong-headed, and he trusted too much and not enough in the wrong proportions. But yes, he was a good man. What was his name? Franklin. Franklin James Whitmore. Ethan nodded, as though committing it to memory. "I'll make sure the lawyer knows his name." Clara looked away at the window. It was beginning to get light. "Lily can't know," she said. "No. I don't want her frightened." Agreed. He began carefully gathering the documents, not stacking them randomly, but organizing them in a way that indicated he understood their order and importance. He was paying attention. He had been paying attention the entire time. "I'll tell her we're taking a trip to Helena to see about some property business. She'll want to bring the doll." "She always wants to bring the doll." "She'll want you to fix the button eye before we go. She won't say so, but she'll want it." Clara blinked. "How do you know that?" He looked at her with the faint expression she had come to recognize as the closest thing he had to a smile. "Because she's been carrying it around every evening and looking at the eye and looking at you for a week. She's waiting for you to notice." Clara closed her eyes briefly. When she opened them, she said, "I'll fix it this morning." He nodded. Then he did something she hadn't expected. He put his hand over hers on the table. Not a gesture of romance. Nothing like that. Nothing that complicated. Just a hand covering hers, steady and warm, and present the way you put your hand on a fence post to feel whether it's solid. "We're going to handle this," he said. She turned her hand over under his. "I know," she said. She surprised herself by meaning it. They had 4 days, as it turned out. Not 3, not a week. 4 days, which they used with the particular efficiency of people who understand that time is a finite resource, and wasting it on panic is a luxury they cannot afford. Ethan sent the telegram to Aldous Crane and Helena. On the first morning, careful and brief legal matter requiring urgent consultation documents of significant importance will arrive within the week. He did not put Clara's name in the telegram. He signed it with his own. Clara spent that same morning doing 3 things. She fixed the button eye on Lily's doll using a bone needle and thread she found in the sewing box and a careful knot she'd watched her mother's seamstress make 20 years ago. She copied the most critical documents by hand, not a perfect legal solution, but a redundancy, because redundancy was the only insurance available to a woman working with lamplight and time pressure. And she wrote down in precise and dated order every event she had witnessed since her father's death, including names, dates, and the specific language her cousin Raymond had used when he came to her bedroom door. She gave Ethan the copies and told him to put them somewhere on the property that she didn't need to know about. He understood why without asking. If they came for the trunk, there needed to be evidence they hadn't anticipated. Lily sensed something, the way children sense things, not the specific facts, but the weather of it, the particular quality of attention that adults give to a room when something is wrong. She came to Clara on the second afternoon while Clara was at the table with the handwritten account. "Are we going somewhere?" Lily asked. "Helena, in a few days. Just a short trip." "Is it because of the men?" Clara looked at her. "What men?" "The ones Papa watches for." Lily said it simply without drama, the way children say things that they have been quietly observing for longer than adults give them credit for. "He stands at the window in the evening since last week. He thinks I don't notice." Clara set down her pen. "Lily, your papa and I are handling something. It's adult business, and it's being handled, and you do not need to be frightened." "I'm not frightened." Lily said this with 6-year-old certainty. "I just want to know if you're both coming back." The sentence hit Clara in the chest with the precision of something aimed. She thought about what she had told this child. "I'm staying. Without qualification. Without hedge." "Yes," she said. "Both of us. We're coming back." "Promise." Clara looked at her. "Yes." She did not add a qualification. She meant it as an absolute, and she let it be one, and she would deal with the weight of that promise the same way she had dealt with everything else in the last 4 months, by working every angle available to her until the promise was possible to keep. Lily nodded. She picked up her doll and looked at the button eye Clara had fixed. "You did a good job," she said. "Thank you. It looks better than before." She considered. "Mama sewed the first button on. The new one looks different, but it's still good." Clara made herself hold very still. "Both buttons are real," Clara said. "Both of them count." Lily looked at her. Then she held the doll up and looked at its 2 eyes, one original, one new, and said, "Okay," in the tone of a child who has received an answer that works and carried it out of the room. Clara sat alone at the table for a moment. Then she went back to writing. The trouble came on the 3rd day. Not from the road. Not from riders at 2 in the morning. It came from town. Ethan returned from the general store with a face that told her before he said a word. "There's a man at the hotel," he said. "Arrived this morning on the stage. He's been asking questions, showing a photograph." Clara went very still. "Of me. Tom Fletcher's boy saw it and came to find me. He's 15, and he had the sense to come directly without talking to anyone else first." He looked at her. "It's you. A few years younger, but it's you." "What's he saying?" "That he's a lawyer representing your family's estate. That you left Philadelphia in a state of mental instability following your father's death, and the family is concerned for your welfare." Ethan's voice was level and cold. "That you may have taken documents belonging to the estate, and that recovering them is a matter of protecting the family's interests." Clara's hands were flat on the table. "He's not a lawyer," she said. "Or if he is, he's not acting as one." "I know. A real lawyer with legitimate cause would have gone to the county sheriff first, not the general store." "I know Clara." "He's a finder," she said. "Harland uses them. Men who locate things and people and don't ask questions about what gets done after. Ethan looked at her steadily. Do you know his name? If he's who I think he is, a man named Doyle. First name, I don't know who Harland used twice before that. I know of then he's careful and he's patient, and he won't do anything obvious in a town where people know my face. He'll wait. He'll watch and wait and send word, and then the people who do the obvious things will come. Ethan pulled out a chair and sat down directly across from her. Then we move the timeline. We leave for Helena tomorrow morning. Tomorrow? Before dawn. The stage goes Tuesday. We don't take the stage. He leaned forward slightly. I know a route that doesn't go through town. Adds half a day, but it keeps us off the road everyone watches. Clara looked at him. You planned for this already. I planned for something like this. Yes. She thought about that. About a man who, when she had told him tomorrow, I'll tell you everything, had gone immediately to the sheriff and started thinking about back routes to Helena. Not because he knew the specifics, but because he had taken her at her word that the specifics were serious enough to warrant preparation. Ethan, she said, I need to talk to Henry Briggs today, he said, already standing. I need him aware that Doyle is at the hotel and what he's claiming and why the claim is fraudulent. Henry can't arrest him for asking questions in a store, but he can make it known that the county sheriff has an eye on a particular stranger, and that changes the calculus for a man like Doyle. Will Briggs believe you without seeing the documents? Ethan looked at her with that expression she had learned straight a little dry. Henry Briggs has known me for 11 years. I once vouched for a quarter-horse purchase he didn't have money for. He believes me. Clara nodded. But I want you to write a summary, Ethan said. 1 page. Key facts, only your father's name, the date of death, the nature of the false documents, Harland Whitmore's name, and the value of the estate. Not for Henry. Henry doesn't need a page. For Crane and Helena. So when we arrive, he already knows the shape of what he's dealing with. She was already reaching for her pen. He went out. He was back in 2 hours. And when he came back, the line of his shoulders was different. Something released in it. Something that told her Briggs had listened and believed and responded in the way that Ethan's expression meant correctly. Henry's going to pay a visit to the hotel this afternoon, Ethan said. Routine. Sheriff checking on a new arrival. He'll make it cordial. He hung up his hat. But he'll also make it clear that he runs a close county and he likes to know what brings people through. That'll slow Doyle down. 1 day, maybe 2. He looked at her. We need to leave tomorrow. Can you be ready? I've been ready to leave on a moment's notice for 4 months, Clara said. I can be ready in 1 evening. He almost smiled. She was getting better at catching the ones that almost happened. Lily needs to know we're leaving at 4 in the morning, he said. She won't like it. She'll like it if it's presented as an adventure. She's 6, not 3. She's also her father's daughter, Clara said. She'll want to know the practical reason. Tell her we need to make good time on the road. She'll understand that. He looked at her. You've gotten to know her. She's not difficult to know. She just needs someone to bother. He was quiet for a moment. Her mother used to say the same thing. Clara held his gaze. She understood that this was not a thing he said easily, that the name of what Lily's mother used to say lived in the category of things Ethan Callahan kept locked in private, and that he had opened it anyway. Thank you for telling me that, she said. He nodded once the way he acknowledged things. Then he went to check on the horses. That night, after Lily was in bed and the house was quiet, Clara opened the trunk one last time. She went through every document in the order she had originally packed them, confirming they were all there, all in the right sequence, all complete. She had done this the night she left Philadelphia, the night she arrived in Broken Creek, and a dozen nights in between the particular ritual of someone who has learned that the only security available is verification. Everything was there. She locked the trunk. She held the key against her palm, the cold weight of it, and she thought about her father's face. The way he had looked at her across his office desk on those Saturday mornings with that specific expression she had spent years trying to earn and had only fully understood after he was gone, which was that she had earned it a long time before she knew she was trying. You are the only one who understands what I'm trying to build, Clara. She understood now. She understood in a way that 4 months ago she could not have articulated, that what he had been building was not the railroad, not the land holdings, not the empire of steel and right-of-way agreements. The railroad was the means. What he had been building was the right for a woman with his blood in her veins to stand on ground that was hers by legitimate claim and say, "This is mine, I earned the right to be here, and I will not move." She put the key back around her neck. She went to bed. She lay there in the dark and thought about tomorrow and the back road to Helena and Aldous Crane, and what Harland Whitmore would do when he found out she'd gotten to a lawyer first. She thought about the photograph at the hotel. She thought about Doyle in his heavy coat, patient and watchful. She thought about Ethan's hand over hers on the table. She thought about what it meant that the thing she was most afraid to lose was no longer the documents in the trunk. It was this house, this man, this child who had patched her dead mother into a button eye and decided that both buttons counted. She was still thinking about that when she heard the sound. Not horses this time. A voice. A man's voice outside, low and carrying just enough to be heard through the window glass. Clara was out of bed in one motion. She did not go to the window. She went to the door, opened it, and Ethan was already in the hall, already dressed, already moving, which meant he had not been asleep either, or had learned to wake faster than she'd ever known a man to wake. "Stay with Lily," he said. "Ethan, go to Lily." His voice was quiet and absolute. He had the rifle in his right hand, and his left hand found her arm in the dark, and turned her not roughly, but with the specific firmness of someone who has run out of time for discussion. She went to Lily. The little girl was awake, sitting up in bed with the doll in her arms, her eyes open in the dark. "Someone's outside," Lily said. "Yes," Clara said. She sat on the edge of the bed and pulled Lily close. She kept her voice steady. "Your papa is handling it." "Is it the men?" "Lily?" "Is it?" Clara held her tighter. "Your papa is handling it," she said again. Outside, she heard Ethan's voice, measured cold, carrying the particular authority of a man standing on his own land with a rifle and no intention of backing up. She heard another voice answer. She could not make out the words. She held Lily, and she kept her breathing even, and she stared at the closed door of the bedroom, and she thought with the precise, clear-eyed clarity of someone who has burned away every unnecessary thing that she would not let harm come to this child. Not this child, not this house, not this man, whatever it cost. The voices outside stopped. The silence lasted long enough to be wrong. Then Ethan's boots on the porch, the front door opening. His steps in the hall deliberate and unhurried. He opened Lily's door. "It's all right," he said. Clara looked at him over Lily's head. Her eyes asked the question. "It was Doyle," he said. "He came to talk, just to talk." His jaw was tight. "He wanted to let me know that I had something that didn't belong to me." His words. "What did you tell him?" Ethan looked at her steadily. "I told him that everything on my property is mine. And I told him that the next man who came to my home in the dark was going to find out exactly how I feel about that." Lily pulled back from Clara and looked at her father. "Did you scare him?" Ethan looked at his daughter. Something shifted in his face. A weariness, a tenderness, the specific collision of those two things that Clara had come to recognize as the way this man loved his child. "I reckon I made my point," he said. "Good," Lily said. She lay back down and pulled the blanket up. "I'm not scared of him." "You don't need to be," Ethan said. "I know." She looked at Clara. "Are you scared?" Clara looked back at her. At this small, fierce 6-year-old who had lost her mother and was still the bravest person in the room. "No," Clara said. It was almost true. Ethan met her eyes over the bed. "We leave at 4, he said. "I'll be ready." He reached over and tucked the blanket around Lily with a gesture so practiced it was invisible, the kind of thing a man does 10,000 times until it becomes part of him. Then he looked at Clara one more time. "Get some sleep," he said. She went back to her room. She sat on the edge of the bed. She thought about Doyle standing in the dark outside this house, saying that she was something that didn't belong here. She pressed her hand flat against the floor above the trunk and thought about a forged signature on a dead man's will. She thought about a railroad empire and $4 million, and a man in Philadelphia who had already killed once to get what he wanted. Then she thought about a girl who had decided that both buttons counted. She lay down. She closed her eyes. At 4 in the morning, she would be ready. They left at 4 in the morning as promised. Lily did not complain about the hour. She climbed into the wagon with her doll tucked under one arm and her blanket under the other, and fell asleep against Clara's shoulder before they had cleared the first mile, which was the most efficient form of courage Clara had ever witnessed in a small person. Ethan drove. He did not speak much in the dark, which was the right decision. The road required attention. On the back route, the one that added half a day but kept them off the main corridor. And there was the particular quality of dark that existed in Montana in the hours before dawn that demanded a certain respect. Clara sat with Lily's weight against her side, and the trunk secured in the wagon bed behind them, and watched the black outline of the mountains against the slightly less black sky, and thought about what waited in Helena. Aldous Crane had replied to the telegram that same morning Ethan sent it. The reply had been brief and entirely sufficient. Received. Understand urgency. Come directly to office on arrival. Do not discuss matter at hotel. A man who knew not to discuss things at hotels was a man worth 3 days on a back road. They stopped twice to rest the horses, once at a creek crossing where Lily woke long enough to eat biscuits and announced that her doll was also hungry and therefore required a biscuit held up to its face, and once in the midday heat when the road rose into a stretch of heavy timber and the temperature dropped enough to make the rest feel like something earned. Ethan sat on a log and drank from his canteen and looked at the road behind them. Clara sat beside him. Are we being followed? Not yet. He handed her the canteen. Doyle's not a man who does his own following. He reports and waits for instructions, which means the instructions are traveling from Philadelphia to here, and that takes time. How much time? Best case for him, 2 days by telegraph and relay. He took the canteen back. We have today and tomorrow. Then we have enough. He looked at her. You sound certain. I am certain, Clara said. Crane is a good lawyer. The documents are solid. The case for the original will is stronger than anything Harlan can put together in 2 days, because he's been building his case on the assumption that I don't have what I have. She met Ethan's eyes. He never thought I'd get out with the evidence. He assumed I would panic and run with nothing. He underestimated you. Men like Harlan always do. She said it without bitterness. Just the flat acknowledgement of a fact she had verified enough times to know its shape. It's the only advantage I've had. Lily appeared between them, doll extended. She says she's done eating. Tell her she did very well, Ethan said. Lily relayed this information to the doll. The doll apparently accepted the compliment satisfactorily, because Lily sat down in the dirt between them and began examining a pine cone with the focus of a scientist. Ethan looked at his daughter. Then he looked at Clara. He didn't say anything. He didn't need to. They reached Helena on the second afternoon, and Aldous Crane's office was on the second floor of a building on Last Chance Gulch, up a flight of stairs that creaked on every step. The door was open. The man behind the desk stood up when they came in, and Clara assessed him in the first 5 seconds, with the instinct her father had spent years sharpening in her mid-50s, sharp-eyed behind spectacles, hands that showed both desk work and outdoor work in equal measure, and the specific bearing of a man who was not impressed by wealth or intimidated by the lack of it. Good. She needed a man who was impressed by evidence. Mr. Crane, Ethan said. Callahan. He nodded, then looked at Clara. Mrs. Callahan. Yes, Clara said. She had not in 8 weeks thought about the name particularly. It sat differently in her mouth now than it had on the morning she'd said the words beside Ethan in front of the justice of the peace. Heavier, more chosen. She set the trunk on the table. She unlocked it. Crane spent 3 hours with the documents. He read everything in the order Clara specified, asked questions at precise moments that told her he was following the thread exactly, and wrote notes in a hand that was small and legible and very fast. He did not express alarm, which was either good lawyering or a very good performance of it. And when he finished reading the solicitor's letter, the one her father had hidden behind the false drawer bottom, he set it down and looked at Clara over his spectacles for a long moment. "Your father wrote this 10 days before his death," he said. "Yes." "And the carriage accident was ruled accidental," Clara said. "I am not in a position to prove otherwise. What I can prove is that the will Harland Whitmore presented for probate is fraudulent." Crane looked at the two wills side by side. He looked at the document examiner's written statement from Chicago. He looked at the bank records. Then he looked at Clara. "Mrs. Callahan," he said, "I have handled 40 years of property and estate cases in 3 territories. I have seen fraudulent documents before." He tapped the papers. "These are poorly constructed. They are constructed by someone who believed no one would look closely, and they do not hold up to a direct comparison with your father's authenticated signature on file with his bank." Clara felt the breath go out of her. Not surprised she had known this. But hearing it said aloud by a man with 40 years of case experience in a steady, matter-of-fact voice was different from knowing it alone in a lamplit kitchen at 3 in the morning. "Can we move quickly?" Ethan asked from the chair beside Clara. "I would recommend it," Crane said. "If your uncle has located you and it sounds as though he's close to having done so, he will attempt to file an injunction in a Pennsylvania court asserting that the original documents you possess were improperly removed from the estate. He'll claim theft." He looked at Clara. "That claim won't hold because you are the rightful heir and you cannot steal from yourself, but it can delay proceedings long enough to create practical problems." "What do we do?" Clara asked. "I file an emergency petition today with the territorial court here asserting your identity as Franklin Whitmore's sole legitimate heir and the fraudulent nature of the documents currently in probate in Pennsylvania." He was already reaching for paper. "Simultaneously, I telegraph a colleague in Pittsburgh, a man named Garrison, who handles estate fraud and who I trust, and have him appear before the Pennsylvania probate court with copies of your documentation and an affidavit attesting to their authenticity." "How long does the territorial filing take?" Ethan asked. "The judge here is a man named Arbuckle. He is thorough, and he is not fast." Crane paused. "But he is honest, which in a case like this is worth more than fast." "And the Pennsylvania proceedings?" "Garrison is fast," Crane said simply, "and very good." Clara looked at the document spread across his desk. Her father's careful handwriting, his notary's stamp, the letter from a solicitor who had tried to warn him and been too late. "What happens if Harlan's people reach us before the filings are complete?" she asked. Crane looked at her steadily. "Then the filing is complete before they can act on it, because I intend to start writing the moment you walk out that door." He did not say it for comfort. He said it the way lawyers state procedural fact, and Clara believed him the way she believed things that had the weight of professional certainty behind them. They stood to leave. Crane stopped them. "Mrs. Callahan." She turned. "Your father chose well," he said, "in who he raised." Clara held his gaze for a moment. "He thought so," she said. He was right. She walked out first. Ethan, coming behind her, caught the door before it closed and looked back at Crane. "What do you need from me?" Ethan asked. Crane looked at him with the measuring expression of a man assessing something practical. "I need you to keep her safe for 72 hours. After that, the filings will be in 2 court systems simultaneously, and there will be nothing Harland Whitmore can gain by reaching her that he can't lose by trying." Ethan nodded once. He went out. They stayed at a boarding house on the north end of Helena Clean. Quiet, run by a woman named Mrs. Aldred, who asked no questions and charged fair rates, and had, Ethan said, housed 3 men he knew during difficult times without once mentioning their names to anyone who asked. Lily was delighted by the boarding house, specifically by the cat that lived in the front hall, and the fact that they were all sharing 2 rooms, which struck her as an adventure of the highest order. Clara sat with her that evening while Ethan went to send a telegram to Henry Briggs back in Broken Creek, telling him they had arrived safely and asking him to keep an eye on Doyle's movements. Lily was quiet for a long time, the cat in her lap, her doll in her arms. Then she said, "Are the papers going to fix it?" Clara looked at her. "Yes." "Are you sure?" "I am sure." "Because you have a good lawyer." "Because the truth is true," Clara said. "A good lawyer just makes it visible." Lily considered this. "My teacher says truth doesn't always win." "Your teacher is right," Clara said. "Truth doesn't always win, but documented truth, with a good lawyer in 2 court jurisdictions, has considerably better odds." Lily absorbed this. "What's a jurisdiction?" Clara explained it, and explaining it required 20 minutes and a great deal of patience and the use of analogies involving the cat's territory versus the territory of the dog 2 houses down. But by the end of it, Lily had a working grasp of the concept, and Clara felt absurdly that she had accomplished something more real than anything else that day. Ethan came back with a reply from Briggs already. He sat down across from Clara and handed her the telegram. She read it. Then she read it again. "What is it?" Ethan asked. She set the telegram on the table between them. It said Doyle left this morning, not alone. 3 men eastbound stage. 1 man remained, watching the ranch. Clara felt the cold move through her. "He left," Ethan said. He was already reading it, already calculating. "He sent word to Philadelphia. The 3 men eastbound are Harlan's people coming west. The 1 man remaining is watching the property to see if we come back. How long to Helena from Philadelphia by the fastest route?" 6 days minimum, Ethan said. 3 by rail to Chicago, then another 3 west. "We have more time than we thought. We have time for Crane to complete the filings." He looked at her. "And then we have a different problem." Clara looked at him. "When the filings are complete," Ethan said, "Harland Whitmore is going to know he has lost the legal battle. A man who has already killed once to gain an empire does not stop because a lawyer filed papers." The sentence sat between them. "He'll come after the documents," Clara said. "Not the legal proceedings, the original documents." "Yes. If the originals are destroyed, it complicates the case considerably, even with copies and Crane's testimony." Ethan's voice was flat and precise. "We need to not have the originals in one place." Clara looked at the trunk. She had been carrying everything in one place for 4 months out of necessity, running required portability, and she had not had time to think past the immediate need of getting out and getting to somewhere safe. But Ethan was right. Distributed evidence was harder to destroy than evidence in a trunk. "Crane should keep a complete set," she said. "Already sent that message," Ethan said. "He's making certified copies today and lodging the originals with the court clerk under seal." Clara looked at him. "You anticipated this," she said. "I thought about it on the road yesterday," he said simply. "You were watching Lily sleep, and I was thinking about what a man who had already done what Harlan did would try next." She looked at him for a long moment. "You've been 10 steps ahead this entire time." "I've been trying to be." His voice was even. "I've been working from behind because I didn't know the full picture until 3 days ago. I'm trying to make up the ground." Clara reached across the table and picked up the telegram and held it in both hands. "There's something I haven't told you," she said. Ethan waited. "The document examiner in Chicago," she said. "The man who looked at the copies of the fraudulent documents and gave me the written statement." She paused. "He's missing." The words landed. Ethan said nothing. "I found out the day before I left Chicago," Clara said. "He didn't come to his office for 3 days, and his landlady reported him absent. I didn't see it confirmed, but She stopped. "I believe Harland found him." Ethan's expression didn't change. His hands were flat on the table, and they did not change either. "You've been carrying that," he said, "since Chicago." "By yourself." "I didn't know how to say it," Clara said. "I didn't know how to say I believe my uncle may have done to a document examiner what I believe he did to my father, and I am the reason that man is missing because I asked for his help." Her voice was very steady, and she hated it for being steady. She wanted it to shake so the feeling had somewhere to go. but it was steady. "I am the reason." "No," Ethan said. "Ethan, Harland Whitmore is the reason," he said. "You are not responsible for what a murderer does to protect himself. You are not." He said it the way he said the things he was certain of, without decoration, without hedging with the full weight of a man who had decided something and was not revisiting it. "Do you understand me?" Clara looked at him. She had been told many things in the last 4 months by lawyers and landladies, and the woman at the mail-order agency, and a document examiner who had believed in her case and then disappeared. She had been told she was unstable, she was impractical, she was too emotional to manage the matter of her own inheritance. She was too cold and calculating to be trusted. Nobody had ever said you are not responsible for a murderer's actions, in a voice that had no argument left in it. She felt something crack open in her chest that had been sealed shut since the day in Chicago when she had read the landlady's note and known what it meant. "I understand," she said. She meant it. Ethan held her gaze another moment. Then he looked at the telegram. "We stay 2 more days. We let Crane complete the filings. We let Garrison move in Pittsburgh." He looked up. "And then we go home." The word landed differently than it would have 8 weeks ago. Home. She hadn't had one for 4 months. She was beginning to understand that she'd been building one for 2 of them. "Okay," she said. The next 2 days had the particular quality of a held breath. Crane sent word on the first morning that the territorial filing was complete, and Judge Arbuckle had accepted the emergency petition and signed an order recognizing Clara's identity claim pending a full evidentiary hearing. Crane's note at the bottom of the message in smaller handwriting said, "Garrison appeared in Pittsburgh this morning. Probate judge has issued a hold on Whitmore's filings pending review of conflicting documentation. Harland Whitmore has retained new counsel. This is good news. It means he is now fighting a legal battle rather than running an operation." Clara read that last line 3 times. Fighting a legal battle rather than running an operation. That was the difference. That was what Crane was telling her, that a man conducting an operation could move freely and quickly, and use methods that legal proceedings could not touch. A man fighting a legal battle was constrained by the same systems he was trying to corrupt, and those systems moved slowly and required paper and appearances and justifications. Harland Whitmore was now in the system. He was in it from 2 directions at once. She felt the first unclenching of something that had been clenched for 4 months. Ethan took Lily to see a woman who sold candy from a shop on the main street, and Clara sat alone in the boarding house room with the emptied trunk open on the bed and looked at the space inside it. All the papers were with Crane now sealed and certified and filed. The trunk was empty. It had not been empty since the night she packed it in Philadelphia. She put her hand inside it and felt the bare wood. She thought about what it had weighed. Not the papers weighed almost nothing. The weight was what they represented, what they meant, what hung from them, like a body from a rope. Her father's life's work, the truth about how he died, the proof of what had been taken, and what had been attempted, and what she had survived. She thought about carrying that alone for 4 months. She thought about a man who had sat across a kitchen table at 5 in the morning and listened to the whole of it without flinching. She closed the trunk. She looked at the window. Then she heard boots on the stairs. Not Ethan's, somebody else's 2 sets moving fast. She was standing before the sound registered, her hand going to the key at her throat by reflex. The knock was hard. "Mrs. Callahan." A voice she didn't know. "I'm here on behalf of Aldous Crane. I need you to come to his office immediately." Clara did not open the door. "Why?" "There's been a development in Pittsburgh. Mr. Crane says you need to hear it directly." She thought for exactly 3 seconds. Then she thought Crane had told her not to discuss the matter at the hotel. He had not said not to come to the office. The man's voice was local, not Eastern, not the particular accent of a man who had grown up in Philadelphia money. She opened the door. The man was young, clerk-aged, with ink on his fingers, and the harried expression of someone sent on an urgent errand. The other person was Mrs. Aldred, the boarding house owner, who had apparently come up the stairs with him out of proprietorial concern and was watching Clara with a sharp, kind expression. "Is there someone who can come with you?" Mrs. Aldred asked. "Yes," Clara said. "I'll find him." She found Ethan and Lily coming back from the candy shop, and Lily had a peppermint stick and the expression of someone who had been in a difficult negotiation and won. And Ethan read Clara's face in the time it took to walk 10 feet toward her. He handed Lily to Mrs. Aldred without a word. Lily looked between them with those enormous eyes. "Adventure," she said. "Stay with Mrs. Aldred," Ethan said. "Don't let the cat eat your peppermint." Lily looked at the cat. The cat looked at the peppermint. Lily tucked it behind her back. "It won't," she said with conviction. They went to Crane's office. The news from Pittsburgh was not a development. It was an earthquake. Garrison had appeared in the probate court that morning, and the judge had reviewed the conflicting documentation and ordered a suspension of Harland Whitmore's probate proceedings, pending a full fraud investigation. Standard enough. What was not standard was what had happened afterward. Harland Whitmore's new counsel, Crane said, looking over his spectacles at Clara, withdrew from the case this afternoon, all 3 of them. Clara stared at him. All 3, simultaneously. Which does not happen unless the lawyers in question have been presented with information that makes continued representation professionally untenable. Crane set down the telegram from Garrison. "Mrs. Callahan, it appears that your father's original solicitor, the man who wrote the letter you found behind the drawer, kept his own records. His office was not closed, it was relocated. And the new solicitor and associate found those records last week and brought them to Garrison." The room was very quiet. "What records?" Clara's voice was barely there. "Documentation of 2 meetings between your father and his solicitor in the month before his death. Detailed notes on Harland Whitmore's threats. A letter drafted but not sent to the Pennsylvania District Attorney." Crane folded his hands on the desk. "And a sworn affidavit witnessed and sealed attesting to Franklin Whitmore's state of mind, his specific fears about his brother, and his intention to update his legal protections, which he did not live to complete." Clara felt the edges of her vision go strange. Her father had been trying to protect himself. He had known at the end that Harland was dangerous, and he had been working with his solicitor to build a case, and he had not finished in time. But his solicitor had finished for him, posthumously, after a year of not knowing who to trust with the information. "The fraud investigation in Pennsylvania," Ethan said beside her. His voice was steady. "What does this mean for it?" "It means," Crane said, "that Harland Whitmore is no longer fighting a probate dispute. He is the subject of a criminal investigation." The silence lasted 5 full seconds. "He'll run," Clara said. "He may try," Crane said. "Garrison has already been in contact with the district attorney's office. There is a warrant being drafted." Clara pressed both hands flat on Crane's desk and looked at her father's name on the filing in front of her. Franklin James Whitmore, deceased. Estate of. "Will it hold?" she asked. "The affidavit alone is enough to open the criminal case," Crane said. "Combined with your documentation, the bank records the document examiner's written statement." He stopped. "The examiner is missing," Clara said. "I told you." "Yes." Crane's expression was careful. "His disappearance has now been formally noted by Garrison as part of the investigation. It is being treated as a separate matter of inquiry." Clara straightened. "It wasn't separate," she said. "I know," Crane said quietly. "The investigators know." She stood there for a moment with that information, with the weight of a man who had believed in her case and paid for it. She was not going to let that be buried or minimized or filed away as a separate matter of inquiry that never became anything. "I want that on record," she said. "Specifically, by name and date and the specific circumstances of his disappearance in connection with this case." Crane looked at her. "That is already in the motion," he said. "I put it there this morning." She looked at him. She thought about her father saying, "You are the only one who understands what I'm building." She thought about 40 years and $4 million and a trunk that was empty now. its contents distributed into the hands of honest men in 2 jurisdictions who were doing exactly what they were supposed to do. She thought about a document examiner who had said your case is solid and then disappeared. "Thank you," she said to Crane. "Thank your father," he said. "He built something honest. That's harder to destroy than people think." She walked out of that office into the afternoon light and stood on the landing at the top of the creaking stairs and put her hand on the railing and breathed. Ethan came and stood beside her. He didn't say anything. She didn't need him to. After a moment she said, "He was trying to protect me, my father, at the end. He was building a case and he ran out of time." "I know," Ethan said. He knew what Harlan was capable of and he was trying to get ahead of it, and he didn't make it. "I know." "He would have told me," she said. "If he'd had more time, he would have told me everything." "Yes," Ethan said. "He would have." She looked out at the street below, at the ordinary afternoon of a Montana town going about its business. A blacksmith, a woman with a basket, a boy chasing a dog. "I want to go home," she said. The word came out completely naturally without calculation, without the careful awareness she usually brought to using it. Ethan looked at her. She looked back at him. Neither of them said anything about the word, but she felt him make a decision in the pause she had learned to feel when he made decisions, the particular settling of a man who has arrived at something he intends to stay at, and when he spoke his voice had the quality it had when he said things he meant all the way to the ground. "Then let's go get Lily," he said, "and go home." They collected Lily from Mrs. Aldred, who had prevented the cat from eating the peppermint stick through, as Lily explained at length and with great drama, heroic intervention, a phrase she had clearly picked up from a book and was very pleased to be deploying. They loaded the empty trunk into the wagon. Clara sat beside Ethan on the bench seat, and Lily was between them with her doll and the remainder of the peppermint stick, and they went out of Helena in the late afternoon light, heading west, and then south toward the back road, toward the ranch. Halfway through the first hour, Lily fell asleep between them, tipping sideways until her head was in Clara's lap and her feet were against Ethan's leg. Clara put her hand on Lily's hair. Ethan drove. After a while, he said, without looking away from the road, "When we get back, when all of this is resolved, what do you want to do?" Clara thought about it. She thought about $4 million and a railroad empire and a Philadelphia society that was probably even now adjusting its opinion of her case with the precise social agility of people who always know which way the wind is blowing. She thought about what she could do with that money. The investments, the property management, the legal and financial and social opportunities that would reopen themselves to her when Harlan's case collapsed under the weight of documented truth. She thought about all of that. Then she looked at the dark outline of the mountains against the evening sky, and thought about cold hands and biscuit dough and a girl who had located her dead mother in a sound. "I want to finish fixing the north fence line," she said. Ethan looked at her. The expression on his face was the one she had been cataloging for weeks, the ones that almost happened, the ones that got close and then retreated. This one did not retreat. It was small and brief and entirely real, and it was the most he had ever shown her at once. "That fence isn't going anywhere," he said. "Neither am I," said Clara. The wagon moved on through the dark. Behind them, in 2 court systems, the machinery of documented truth was grinding forward in the slow, unstoppable way of things that are correct. And ahead, 3 days on a back road, a house was waiting, hers. They came home to a ranch that had been watched. Henry Briggs met them at the gate, and the fact that he was there before they arrived told Clara everything she needed to know about how seriously he had taken his job in their absence. He was a tall man, spare and weathered, with the kind of quiet authority that didn't require demonstration, because it had never been questioned. "Doyle's man left 2 days ago," Briggs said. He was talking to Ethan, but his eyes moved to Clara with the particular assessment of a man who has been protecting something and wants to confirm it was worth protecting. "Packed up quiet and took the eastbound stage. No trouble." "You're sure he's gone?" Ethan asked. I watched him get on the stage myself, Briggs said. And I telegraphed the sheriff in the next county to confirm he got off where he was supposed to and kept moving. He paused. Word travels when you want it to. Thank you, Henry. Briggs looked at Clara directly. Mr. Crane sent word this morning. Said to tell you the Pennsylvania court issued a freeze on all asset transfers from your father's estate pending the fraud investigation. He said it plainly without ceremony, the way honest men deliver important news. Said you'd understand what that means. Clara understood exactly what it meant. It meant Harland Whitmore could not move money, could not liquidate holdings, could not strip the empire her father had built and scatter it into accounts that a court order couldn't reach. The freeze was the single most important procedural step in the entire case, and Crane had gotten it done while she was still on a back road heading home. Yes, she said. I understand. Briggs nodded, once, tipped his hat to her with the specific respect of a man who has revised his assessment of a person upward and rode out. Lily was already off the wagon and through the gate, the doll under her arm, and she stopped in the middle of the yard and looked around at everything with the expression of a child confirming that the world is still where she left it. The chickens are still here, she announced. They are, Ethan said. And the rooster. Afraid so. Lily looked at Clara. He missed you. He absolutely did not, Clara said. He did. He was meaner than usual. Tom Fletcher's boy said so when he came to feed them. Lily considered this. I think that's how he shows it. Clara looked at the rooster in question, who was regarding her from across the yard, with the beady, unimpressed gaze he reserved specifically for her. She looked at him for a moment. He looked back. We have an understanding, Clara told him. The rooster walked away. Lily interpreted this as resolution and went inside. Ethan unloaded the wagon, and Clara carried the empty trunk back to her room and set it at the foot of the bed and looked at it. Empty. Locked out of habit, even with nothing inside. She stood there for a moment, and then she unlocked it and left it open and walked out of the room and did not look back at it. She went to the kitchen. She washed her hands under the pump. The water was cold, and she held her hands under it longer than she needed to, feeling the cold move through her palms, and she thought about biscuit dough and cold hands making things right, and she thought about a man who had offered that small piece of his mother's knowledge across a kitchen table without ceremony and without expectation of anything in return. She started breakfast. Ethan came in while she was working and did not say anything about the fact that she was cooking at 7 in the evening, rather than any reasonable breakfast hour, because they had been on a road for 3 days, and the rituals of ordinary life had to start somewhere, and this was as good a place as any. He poured 2 cups of coffee and set one beside her without being asked. Crane will need us back in Helena in 6 weeks, he said, for the evidentiary hearing. I know. It'll be longer after that. The criminal investigation in Pennsylvania could take months. I know that too. And when it's resolved... He stopped. Clara looked up from the dough. He was looking at his coffee cup, and she recognized the posture, the particular way this man held himself when he was about to say something that cost him something to say. She had seen it twice. Once by the fire when he told her what Lily's mother used to say. Once on the road to Helena when he said, "We're going to handle this," and put his hand over hers. When it's resolved, he said, "You'll have options you don't have now." Yes, significant options. He looked up. I want you to know that I'm aware of that. I don't want you to feel like the resolution of this is also I don't want you to feel obligated to anything because of... He stopped again. Clara set down her work and turned to face him fully. Ethan. He looked at her. Are you trying to tell me that when I recover my father's estate and $4 million and a railroad empire, you will understand if I choose to leave? He held her gaze. I'm trying to tell you that I won't hold you to anything. You're not holding me to anything, she said. I'm standing here. I know where you're standing. Then why are you having this conversation? He was quiet for a moment. Because I need to say it. Because you came here running, and I need you to know that whatever you do next, you're not running. You're choosing. Clara looked at him. She thought about the first morning she had woken in this house and put her hand under the bed to feel the lock on the trunk and told herself she was a practical woman who was nobody's problem. She thought about the specific texture of survival, thin and taut, and how different it felt from this, which was not thin at all. This was solid all the way down. "I know the difference," she said quietly, "between running and choosing. I have spent 4 months learning that difference at some considerable personal cost." She held his gaze. "I am choosing." The kitchen was very quiet. "Okay," Ethan said. It was the same word he had said in the hall at 2 in the morning when she'd told him tomorrow. The same weight, the same steadiness. A man who received things without making them into more than they were, and somehow making them into exactly what they needed to be. "Okay," Clara said back. She turned back to the dough. He picked up his coffee. And that was the whole of it, which was also the whole of everything. Lily came downstairs an hour later and ate the biscuits that came out right on the first try, which Clara noted privately and without comment. And Ethan ate too, without expression, which was his version of a standing ovation. And the lamp burned on the kitchen table. And outside, Montana settled into the particular dark of late autumn, cold and enormous and indifferent in the way of things that have no stake in human affairs, but provide in their vastness a kind of accidental comfort. The next morning, Clara was at the north fence before 7. Ethan found her there at 1:15, and he stood at the top of the rise and looked down at her for a moment before he came the rest of the way. "You could have waited," he said. "I wanted to see how it held through the weeks we were gone." She ran her hand along the top rail. "2 of the posts need resetting. The ground's shifted." He came and looked at the posts. He pressed against the nearest one with the heel of his hand, testing it. "You're right." "I know I'm right. I've been looking at this fence for 8 weeks. You've been here 9 weeks. The first week I was trying to keep the chickens alive." He looked at her with the almost expression. "You're getting better with the chickens. Don't push it." He went back for the tools and they reset the posts through the morning, and it was cold enough that she could see her breath, and her hands ached in the good way of work being done correctly. And Ethan worked beside her without commentary or instruction, because she didn't need instruction anymore on this particular task. And that fact sat in the air between them like something named without being spoken. She was thinking about the second post when she heard the horse, coming fast, from the direction of town. Both of them heard it at the same time, and both of them turned, and Ethan's hand moved to the rifle on the fence post with the speed of a man who had spent 3 weeks learning to be ready. It was Tom Fletcher's boy, 15 years old, riding hard, and when he pulled up his horse was blowing, and his face was flushed, and he was holding a telegram. "Came in this morning," he said, breathing hard. "Mr. Crane said urgent, said to write it out direct." Ethan took it. He read it. His face did the thing it did, went still. Then something moved through it that she couldn't read, and then it settled into something she had never seen before. Something that looked on this particular face unprecedented. He handed it to Clara. She read it. She read it twice. The telegram was from Crane, relayed from Garrison in Pittsburgh. Harland Whitmore had been arrested that morning. The warrant had been signed by a Pennsylvania judge on the basis of the accumulated evidence, the fraudulent documents, the solicitor's affidavit, the bank record discrepancies, the testimony of 2 witnesses who had notarized the original will and had been, it turned out, pressured by Harland's lawyers to recant and had refused. And 1 additional item that Garrison had listed at the bottom of the telegram with the precision of a man who understood its weight. The carriage wheel. A mechanic in Pittsburgh conscience, apparently not well constructed for carrying certain kinds of secrets, had come forward voluntarily 3 days ago, and stated that he had been paid to modify the wheel assembly on Franklin Whitmore's carriage in a specific way that would cause catastrophic failure under load on a downhill grade. He had given Harland Whitmore's name. He had signed a statement. Clara's hands were not shaking. She did not know why they were not shaking. They should have been. The telegram told her that the man who had killed her father was sitting in a jail cell in Pittsburgh at this moment, and that the specific mechanism of how he had done it was now on record with a court, and that Franklin James Whitmore's death was no longer an accident, and her hands were flat and still around the paper, and her breathing was even. She thought about her father on those Saturday mornings. She thought about the smell of ink and railroad smoke. She thought about a letter hidden behind a false drawer bottom by a man who knew something was coming and was trying to build a wall fast enough to matter. He hadn't made it in time, but she had. She had made it in time for both of them. Tom Fletcher's boy was watching her with the anxious expression of someone who has delivered news and cannot tell if it's good or bad. "Thank you," she said. Her voice was entirely steady. "Tell Mr. Fletcher we're grateful for the ride. Come by this afternoon and we'll have something for you." The boy nodded and turned his horse. Clara stood at the fence line with the telegram in her hands and looked out at the mountains and said nothing. Ethan said nothing either. After a long moment she said, "He knew, my father. He knew what was coming and he tried to stop it and he ran out of time." "Yes. He built things that lasted," she said, "even when he couldn't." "Yes." She folded the telegram carefully, the way she folded important documents along its original lines. "He would have liked you," she said. Ethan looked at her. "He valued practical men," she said. "Men who showed up and did the work without making a production of it." She tucked the telegram into her coat pocket. "He would have liked you considerably." Ethan was quiet for a moment. Then, "I would have liked to know him." That was everything. She didn't say so, but it was. They finished the fence. The weeks that followed changed the ranch, and did not change it. What changed was material and deliberate, and done carefully. Clara wrote to her father's bank in Philadelphia, and to the 2 board members who had known Franklin Whitmore since the beginning, and who had been watching the fraud proceedings with the anxious loyalty of men who believed in what they had built together. She wrote clearly and without sentiment about her intentions. She was not returning to Philadelphia. The railroad interests would be managed through her father's existing board with a new executive appointed by her, a woman she had in mind, one of her father's former deputies, who had been quietly waiting out the crisis with considerable competence. She would retain full ownership and final authority. She would conduct her oversight by correspondence and by quarterly visits to Helena, where Crane had now established himself as her permanent legal representative. She was keeping her father's empire. She was running it from Montana. When she told Ethan, she watched his face carefully. He said, "That's a significant undertaking." "Yes. You'll need to hire additional help for the ranch, if you're spending time on correspondence and travel." She looked at him. "I was thinking about that. There's a family in town, the Garcias. The father worked 2 seasons for the Hendersons before they sold. He's good with horses, and he has 2 sons old enough to work." Ethan considered it. "Miguel Garcia. You know him." "Known him 3 years. He's a good man." "Would you speak to him?" "Yes." She nodded. And then, because she had learned how to say things in this house, she said the direct thing rather than the sideways one. "I'm going to use some of the recovered funds to improve the property. The barn roof, the south pasture, fencing the house." She paused. "I want to do that. This is my home. I want it to reflect that." Ethan was quiet for a moment. "It's your money," he said. "It's our home," she said. The word "our" sat between them, with the weight of something that had been true for a while and was only now being said correctly. Ethan looked at her. "All right," he said. 2 weeks later, a letter arrived from Raymond. Clara read it at the kitchen table alone in the morning. It was 3 pages long, and it was the most accomplished piece of manipulative writing she had encountered since the last time Raymond had opened his mouth, which was saying something. It expressed concern for her well-being. It expressed grief over the misunderstanding that had arisen between the family. It used the word misunderstanding 4 times, which was impressive, given that the thing being misunderstood was murder and fraud in 2 jurisdictions. It concluded by suggesting that perhaps Clara would consider reaching a private settlement that avoided the prolonged public unpleasantness of a criminal trial. Clara set the letter down. She picked up her pen. She wrote 4 words. Speak to my lawyer. She addressed it to Raymond's home in Philadelphia. She sent it. Then she went outside and helped Lily practice her letters in the yard, sitting on the fence rail in the autumn sun, while Lily wrote in a small notebook with intense concentration, and the rooster observed proceedings from a safe distance with his permanent expression of disapproval. "How do you spell justice?" Lily asked. Clara spelled it for her. Lily wrote it carefully, her tongue between her teeth. "What does it mean?" Lily asked. "The real meaning, not the dictionary." Clara looked at her. "It means that the truth catches up eventually. Even if it takes a long time. Even then." Lily wrote something else in the notebook. Clara looked over her shoulder. Lily had written justice means the truth catches up. "That's right," Clara said. "I'm going to remember that," Lily said. She closed the notebook with the satisfaction of someone who has filed something important. "Papa says the same thing different." "What does he say?" Lily thought about it. "He says the ground always tells you what happened. You just have to know how to read it." Clara looked at her. She thought about a man who read fence lines and weather and the weight of a woman's silence and knew what each one meant. "He's right too," Clara said. Ethan was at the barn when she walked over at midday, and he was working on a piece of tack with the focused attention he gave to things that needed to be done correctly, and he looked up when she came in with the particular alertness he had developed, or that she had learned to notice whenever she came through a door. "Raymond wrote," she said. Ethan's hand stilled on the leather. "Saying what?" "Suggesting a private settlement to avoid the trial." She held his gaze. I wrote back. "What did you say, 4 words?" He looked at her. He waited. "Speak to my lawyer," she said. Something moved through his expression. Not satisfaction exactly. Something quieter. Something that lived in the territory between pride and relief. The two feelings that occupy the same space in a person who has been worried about someone they care about. "Good," he said. He went back to the tack. She stayed in the doorway. "Ethan?" He looked up again. "I want to ask you something," she said, "and I want you to answer it honestly, not carefully." "All right." She came into the barn. She stood where the light came in and found her, and she looked at him directly in the way she had learned to look at things she needed to see clearly. "Do you want me here?" she asked. "Not as a practical arrangement. Not as the woman who manages correspondence and teaches Lily arithmetic and knows which fence posts need resetting." She held his gaze. "As the person. Do you want me here?" The barn was completely quiet. Ethan set down the leather. He looked at her the way he looked at things he was certain of, without rush, without deflection, with the full weight of a man who has arrived somewhere he intends to stay. "Yes," he said. "Since when?" He considered it with genuine seriousness, which was what she had wanted, not a polished answer, a real one. "Since the morning I watched you stand in the yard laughing at a rooster," he said. "I didn't know what to call it then. I know now." Clara felt something move through her that had no name and needed none. "I've been in love with you," she said, "since you told me to hold my hands under the cold water." He blinked. It was the most surprised she had ever seen him look. "That was the first week," he said. "I know when it was. You were still burning the biscuits." "I was aware of that, yes." He stared at her. She looked back. Then he crossed the distance between them, and he put both hands on either side of her face, the way a man holds something he's been afraid of dropping, and he kissed her with the particular quality of a man who does everything completely or not at all. She kissed him back. When they separated, she kept her hands against his chest and felt his heartbeat, which was not as steady as his voice usually was, and found that deeply satisfying. "Cold water," he said. "It was a very instructive moment," she said. He made a sound that was not quite a laugh, but was the closest thing to one she had ever heard from him, and it settled somewhere in her chest like the last piece of a thing clicking into place. Outside, Lily's voice. "Papa, the rooster is in the garden again." Neither of them moved for a moment. "Papa?" Ethan leaned his forehead briefly against hers. "The rooster," Clara said. "The rooster." He agreed. He went out. Clara stood in the barn alone and put her hand against the wall, feeling the solid weight of wood and work and years of someone's care, and she breathed in once fully and let herself be here. All the way here. Not running, not calculating the next position, not monitoring the road, or checking the lock in the dark, or measuring the distance between herself and the exit. Just here. The trial took 4 months. It proceeded in Pittsburgh, with Garrison running the case, and Crane present as co-counsel for Clara's interests, and Harland Whitmore's defense attempted 7 different arguments, each of which collapsed in turn against the weight of the accumulated evidence, like fence posts and ground that had never been solid to begin with. Raymond cooperated with prosecutors in exchange for a reduced charge, which was a predictable decision from a predictable man, and the testimony he provided about the specific conversations he had witnessed between his father and the carriage mechanic was, Garrison wrote, devastating and irrefutable. Harland Whitmore was convicted. The sentence was substantial. The estate of Franklin James Whitmore was formally and entirely transferred to his sole legitimate heir, Clara Elizabeth Whitmore Callahan, in a Pennsylvania courtroom on a Tuesday in March, and Clara was not present for the proceeding because she was in Montana resetting a fence post in the south pasture with her husband, who had correctly identified the problem 2 days earlier and had been waiting with characteristic patience for her to reach the same conclusion. "You could have told me sooner," she said, driving the post into the ground. "You would have wanted to see it yourself," he said. She drove the post again. "That's not the point." "That's exactly the point." She looked at him. He looked back. She drove the post a 3rd time. "It's solid," he said. "I know," she said. "I wanted to make sure." Crane's letter arrived that evening, and Clara read it at the table with Lily doing her lessons on one side and Ethan doing the accounts on the other, and the lamp between them throwing its warm circle, and she read every word carefully, and then she set the letter down. "Is it done?" Lily asked without looking up from her work. "Yes." "The good kind of done or the other kind?" "The good kind." Lily turned a page. "Good," she said with the efficiency of a child who has been told enough about the situation to understand the outcome, but has long since decided that the situation was going to resolve correctly and adjusted her attention accordingly. Ethan looked at Clara over the accounts. She looked back at him. She slid the letter across the table. He read it. He set it back down. He reached across the table and covered her hand with his, and she turned her hand under his, and they stayed like that while Lily worked through her letters, and the fire cracked and settled, and the Montana dark pressed warm against the windows. Clara looked at the empty space where the trunk used to sit by the door. She had given it to Lily. The little girl had repurposed it as a treasure chest in which she kept in an organizational system known only to herself, a collection of smooth rocks. 3 feathers of uncertain origin. The notebook with justice means the truth catches up, written in her careful letters, and the doll with 2 button eyes that both counted. The trunk had been a container of fear for 4 months. Now it held what Lily considered the most important things in her world. That seemed right. That seemed like the correct ending for a locked box, not to be kept sealed in the dark, but to be opened and given over to a child who would fill it with rocks and feathers, and words she intended to remember. Later that evening, after Lily was in bed and the house was quiet, Clara stood outside. The cold was real now. Deep autumn heading toward winter, and the stars over Montana were the particular kind of stars that only existed in places where there was no light to compete with them, vast and specific and indifferent in the way of beautiful things that require nothing from you. Ethan came and stood beside her. He put his arm around her shoulders, and she leaned into him, and neither of them said anything for a long time. Then Clara said, "I keep thinking about what he would say." "Your father?" "Yes." "What do you think he'd say?" She thought about it honestly, the way you think about people you've lost, when you've had enough time to think about them without the grief getting in the way of the clarity. "He'd say I chose well," she said, "and then he'd want to look at the ranch books, because he could not help himself. Ethan made the sound that was almost a laugh. "He'd be right," Ethan said, "on both counts." She tilted her head back and looked at the stars. She thought about a girl on a train platform tearing a letter in half and stepping into a life she was building from nothing, and necessity telling herself she was practical and temporary and nobody's problem. She thought about cold water on her hands. She thought about two button eyes that both counted. She thought about a man who ate burned biscuits in silence and called it encouragement. She thought about what her father had built and what she had saved and what she was building now, which was not a railroad empire and was not a fortune and was not anything that could be measured in the units that her father's world had used to measure worth. She was building the thing he had actually been trying to build, the thing that lasted, the thing that was still there after you were gone. She found it here not in documents or estate filings or legal victories in 2 jurisdictions, though those mattered, and she had fought for every one of them. She found it in a kitchen at 5 in the morning and a fence post reset correctly and a child's notebook and a man who said, "Okay," the way other men said, "I promise." The woman who had torn a letter in half on a moving train, who had carried a trunk full of evidence across half a continent and married a stranger and burned the biscuits and fixed a button eye and sat in the dark above a locked box listening for horses. That woman had not been running away. She had been running toward this. She just hadn't known it yet. She knew it now. She pressed closer to Ethan's side and felt the solid weight of him, the permanence of a man who had decided to stand somewhere and stayed. And she looked up at the Montana stars and thought about her father and thought about Lily and thought about the particular shape of a life that fit you. The way good work fits your hands with resistance and rightness in equal measure. "Come inside," Ethan said. "It's cold." "I know," she said. She didn't move yet. "1 more minute." He stayed with her. 1 more minute. And then Clara Whitmore Callahan, who had been an heir and a fugitive and a stranger and a wife and a woman learning to make biscuits in a house that was cold in the mornings and warm in the evenings, and hers entirely and permanently, hers turned away from the stars and walked back through the door of her home. She did not look over her shoulder. She was done looking over her shoulder. She was home.